All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 11:45 session today with Reagan Moore from IMLS. Reagan is with the Office of Museum Services at the Institute of Museum and Library Services. She is the program officer for the Inspire Grants for Small Museum Programs and works directly with the lifelong learning portfolio across all OMS programs, providing support for both applicants and grantees in early learning and K through 12 in and out of school time. Prior to joining IMLS in 2004, she worked with the National Trust for Historic Preservation as an archaeologist. Ms. Moore received her undergraduate degree in anthropology at James Madison University and her master's degree in museum services from George Washington University. So we all are very excited to have Reagan here today. And I'm sure we all have lots of questions about grants for her. And if you want to put those in the chat, we'll answer them at the end. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Reagan.
Thank you. Just give me 1 second to start sharing my screen and we'll get started. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Hello, Nebraska. I'm Reagan, and I'm looking forward to sharing some information with you about IMLS funding opportunities this morning. I'm in the Office of Museum Services, and I've been with IMLS for about 17 years now, so I have plenty of experience with all of our programs over the years. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about IMLS, our funding opportunities across all of the programs in the Office of Museum Services, and some techniques for preparing competitive applications. So who are we? IMLS is an independent grant-making agency. We're the primary source of federal support for the nation's libraries and museums. IMLS helps ensure that all Americans have access to museum, library, and information services. And we support innovation, lifelong learning, and cultural and civic engagement and to economically diverse areas to deliver essential services that make it possible for individuals and communities to thrive. So IMLS funds 2 assessment programs and 6 grant programs. I'm going to touch on each today, and my hope is that you'll see one or more that holds potential for you and your museum. So IMLS programs are not all about writing proposals. The Museum Assessment Program and the Collections Assessment for Preservation Program combine self-assessment with peer assessors to give you recommendations for action. The MAP program offers assessments in collection stewardship, education and interpretation, community and audience engagement, and board leadership. You can find out more about these programs from the organizations that administer them, which is the American Alliance of Museums and the Foundation for Advancement and Conservation. So as I mentioned, there are 6 IMLS museum grant programs, and I'm going to talk about each one of them. So hopefully you can choose a program that's best for your museum. Note that the deadline, which is on the bottom of the screen here, is November 15th, 2021 for all 6 of the grant programs that we administer. I'm giving you this handy chart on the screen and the next for you to keep with you when it's shared with you later by the Nebraska Museum Association. But I'm going to go through each one of these programs in more detail. So I'll skip over this slide. So Museums for America, this is our largest grant program, and we give the largest number of applications to it consequently, and the largest number of awards each year. The focus is on the individual museum. There are 3 project categories into which you can fit nearly everything that your museum does, from providing opportunities for learning, serving as a critical component of livable, sustainable communities, and taking care of and providing access to your collections. You can request from $5,000 up to $250,000, and a 1-to-1 cost share is required. And again, that deadline is later this fall in November. So you're going to notice some different terms in the notice of funding opportunities this year. And I'll try to go through each of these for the different programs, but we're talking about goals in our notice of funding opportunities now. Instead of talking about categories, I mentioned the categories on the previous slide, the lifelong learning and the collection stewardship and the community anchors categories. However, when you go to look at the notice of funding opportunity, you're going to see that language presented as goals. And then the types of activities that you can slot under each of those goals are listed as objectives. So for instance, here you're going to see this lifelong learning category spelled out more as a goal. And the objectives under it are about your public programs, your adult programs, your exhibitions, supporting in-school and out-of-school programs. That's the category that you're going to be applying for those types of activities. And then for goal 2, that would connect to your community category that you would apply under, and that's where you're going to do your community-driven exhibitions and programs, your audience research, all of that community engagement and civic engagement that you do at a museum. And then lastly, the collection stewardship category is going to be under goal 3, and those objectives talk about the activities there, which is your cataloging and inventorying, your conservation treatment and environmental improvement, and all of that digital asset management that you do. That's where you're going to put those types of projects. And then because we're talking to Nebraska today, I pulled examples under each program of recent awards that have gone to museums in Nebraska. So you're seeing here the Durham Museum in Omaha. This project was funded to create a comprehensive catalog and inventory of the materials in their history object collection, to rehouse the objects in accordance with recommendations of a consulting conservator, and to purchase and install new storage equipment. And this was funded under the Museums for America program. Next up, we have Museums Empowered. So this program is technically an initiative under our Museums for America program. It supports projects designed to build internal capacity through professional development. It's built around 4 project categories: digital technology, diversity and inclusion, evaluation, and organizational management. Like those to MFA, the Museums Empowered projects can be structured from 1 year to 3 years long, and the requests can be made between $5,000 and $250,000, with again, a 1-to-1 cost share being required. So just like Museums for America, those categories are going to be listed in the Notice of Funding Opportunity as goals. So each of the categories I just mentioned are spelled out on each of these slides with examples of the types of projects that can be supported in the program there. So for instance, here's where we're improving museum operations and communications by training museum staff to become more effective and efficient users of digital technology, expanding digital access to collections by training staff and on the use of these collections management systems. Here we're attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. We are strengthening a museum's ties to diverse communities by increasing cultural competency of museum staff, and we're supporting emerging professionals from diverse communities. In goal 3, we're empowering museum staff through professional development to use evaluation as a tool. And lastly, category 4, we're empowering museum staff through professional development to improve organizational management. And we supported the Nebraska Historical Society through this program to develop staff capacity in programming and evaluation by focusing on cultivating curiosity among its staff and visitors. So the Inspire Grants for Small Museums is the program that I oversee. It's also an initiative under the Museums for America program, and it supports the same kinds of projects that Museums for America does, but it's geared to meet the needs of small museums. Projects can last up to 2 years, and the requests from IMLS can range from $5,000 to $50,000, and cost share is allowed, but it is not required, which provides some additional help to small museums. And I'm sure the question you're asking yourself right now, and perhaps even chatting, what is small? That can take many forms, of course, and we ask applicants to make that case that they qualify as small in comparison to other institutions of the same discipline or within the same geographic region. So this might be number of staff and volunteers. It might be the number of person hours worked per week. It might be the operating budget. It might be the number and types of collections. It might be the size of the facility or some combination thereof. The point is that we're asking you to make that case and for the reviewers to take a look at the case that you're presenting in your application. And then again, just as the other two programs before, the different categories are spelled out under the goals. So this first goal is your learning goal. This is where you're going to put, again, your public programs and exhibitions and K-12 in and out of school programs. And then secondly, this is new this year. Instead of having a community category, which would align with Museums for America, we've changed things slightly to build the capacity of small museums to work more effectively. So this is the building institutional capacity category. And this is where you can put your planning projects, policy development, recruitment, training of staff, technology enhancements, website enhancements, things like that. And then in goal 3, just like Museums for America, this is your collections category. This is where you're going to do all the cataloging and registration and database management and those sorts of projects. And then I don't have an example for a grant award to Nebraska through the Inspire funding opportunity. It's still so new, but it could be your application this year, so we hope you submit it. So instead, I'm sharing an example from the Gateway to Science Center in Bismarck, North Dakota. And this is a project that worked with very young children up to age 5 and their parents and caregivers to increase adult knowledge to facilitate children's science learning experiences. National Leadership Grants for Museums support projects that address critical needs of the museum field and advance museum practice. It differs from the other programs I've already talked about in that these projects are expected to have the potential for impact reaching far beyond the applicant institution. When you apply to the National Leadership Grant Program, you're raising your hand to solve a challenge the field is facing and to share your results and be they research findings, models, software, toolkits. It should be designed for use by other museums. Important to note is that this grant program is the only one in which IMLS can fund research, as defined in the federal sense, that is. Not all NLG projects are research projects, but if you're thinking of a true research project, this is the only program to which you can apply. National Leadership has no categories. That's new this year. Instead, it's your job to make the case that your project addresses a high priority need in the museum field, and then it fits one of the program goals that we're going to discuss next. There are 3 funding levels with varying cost share requirements, as you can see here, and the minimum award is $5,000 and the maximum is $1 million. So the goals here are to advance the museum's field's ability to empower people of all ages and backgrounds through cross-disciplinary learning. So what does that mean? This is supporting the development, implementation, dissemination of model programs, again, used by all museums across the field, supporting training and professional development, supporting research, focusing on museums engaging learners of all types. Could be supporting new and innovative methods for addressing community challenge, maybe through partnerships or services. It's supporting the development and implementation of training and program development or professional development, and supporting research again. Or it could be identifying new solutions to widespread collections care or conservation issues. So we were going to see that on actually the next slide, which is the Omaha Zoo in Omaha, Nebraska, improve the management of rhino populations to become genetically and demographically viable within the country's zoos. So this is something that supported zoo work across the country, not just in Omaha, Nebraska. So our museum grants for African American history and culture support projects that nurture museum professionals, build institutional capacity, and increase access to museum and archival collections at African American museums and historically Black colleges and universities. This program has 2 funding levels. In one, requests can range from $5,000 to $50,000 with no cost share required. And in the other, the range is $50,001 up to $250,000. And in that range, you have to have a cost share of 1-to-1. To be eligible for this program, an institution must have as its primary purpose, as reflected in its mission, African American art, life, history, and culture. So there are no categories in this program, but again, there are goals, and this is where we're going to talk about the different types of projects we can see here, such as expanding educational programs, enhancing professional management, improving care of collections, and fostering partnerships. Or maybe you're supporting emerging professionals just entering the museum field, developing an internship program, or developing equitable inclusion in recruitment and retention programs. And here is an example from the Malcolm X Memorial Center, which strengthened its partnership with the local school district by developing a curriculum to enhance student learning in African American history. They engaged a curriculum writer to develop 3 lesson plans for the Omaha Public School District and for students in grades 6 to 12. The consultant's going to work with the museum staff, the local teachers and professors at the University of Nebraska, the Black Studies Department to reproduce relevant historical materials and incorporate them into classroom lessons. And then we have our Native American, Native Hawaiian Museum Services Program. This program supports projects that enhance museum services to sustain heritage, culture, and knowledge among Indian tribes and organizations serving Native Hawaiians. Projects can extend from 1 to 2 years, and the request can go up to $100,000 with no cost share required. To be eligible for an award in this program, applicants must be federally recognized Indian tribes or organizations that primarily serve and represent Native Hawaiians. There are no specific project categories, but projects can take any several forms, ranging from developing and delivering interpretive and educational programs and exhibitions, providing professional development opportunities, creating partnerships with schools and other entities, managing and caring for collections, and planning digitization activities. And that's again what you see reflected here in the slides. Since there are no categories, categories for you to apply under, these are the goals that you would hope to sort of find your project align with. And I don't have a recent example of a Native American tribe that has submitted an application to this program in recent years, so I am giving you an example from the state of Washington. This project was a $74,000 project to develop a website to provide an alphabetized lexical word list in plain table format and searchable in 2 directions for the interested public. So here I have a quick comparison chart for you of the characteristics of successful proposals submitted for the Museums for America, Museums Empowered and Inspired Grants for Small Museums program. And then the others reflect the National Leadership Grants for Museums. So you can see that the eligibility requirements here are very different. Under the first 3 programs, the eligible entity is a museum, whereas for the National Leadership Grant Program, the eligible entity could be a museum. It also could be an institution of higher education or an organization that advances museums and the museum profession. And here are the characteristics of successful proposals within the African American History and Culture Museum and the Native American, Native Hawaiian program. Most important here are the specific eligibility requirements for each of these programs. So we want you to study these carefully and contact program staff if you have questions. But you can see at the top that the characteristics of successful proposals is the same, but the eligibility is quite different. As I mentioned before, for our African American History and Culture program, the museum must have a primary purpose of African American life, art, history, and culture, or be a museum service organization whose primary purpose is that, or be a historically Black college or university. For our Native American, Native Hawaiian program, the eligibility is that of a Native American tribe or an organization that serves and represents Native Hawaiians, or Alaska Native villages, regional corporations, or village corporations. So here is a slide that will help you understand the timeline of what your application will go through once you submit it. So the deadline again is November 15th of this year. So we hope that you get them in earlier than that, but we hope that you get it in by midnight on November 15th, 2021. For a couple of months, you'll see that IMLS staff goes through your applications. We make sure your application is complete and that it is eligible. If it is not, we will be reaching out to you because we cannot send to review applications that are missing documents or from institutions that aren't eligible. And then once your application is complete and eligible for review, we'll send it out to 2 different tiers of review in some cases. So for many of our programs, the applications go out to what we call field review. That means the applications are reviewed by 3 of your peers who have subject matter expertise in the types of projects that you've submitted. And they look at the applications for about 4 weeks. They give us their comments and reviews through an online portal. We take those comments and those review scores and we rank them and we look at them and we analyze them. And then we send about half of them on to what we call panel review in the month of May. So they get reviewed for another 4 weeks in April. And then in May, we have what we call panel meetings where we sit around and discuss the applications that have made it to this tier. That looks a little different now during COVID. Those panel meetings will be happening over Zoom. But it's the same sort of concept where we want to bring the reviewers together to have a conversation about the applications, and they're looking at the applications with a different lens, trying to make sure that they're poised for success and that they will be successful if we were to provide federal funding to them. And then they go off to our director who makes the final decision by law. He will take a look at the applications from a different perspective. He tries to look at things, for instance, by geography. Or other ways that maybe the applications haven't sorted themselves naturally by score. Sometimes he says, let's take a look at these other applications that came from the state. We didn't have as many from the state this year, that sort of thing. And then the awards are announced in June for our 2 smaller programs, the African American History and Culture and the Native American, Native Hawaiian. And those projects will start by July 1. And then the awards are announced in August for the other 3 larger programs with all projects starting by September 1 of the next year. So you can see it's a long process, but it's worth it to get those good reviews and that good feedback to all of our applicants, funded or unfunded. You'll receive all of your comments and scores back. So I'm going to go through some tips. So all of these applications require this set of, on the left side, all of these documents are required. And if you're missing any of these, your application will be rejected. So these first couple of forms are automatically generated by grants.gov. When you go to submit your application, you will be prompted to fill out these forms. And then you will need to attach your organizational profile, your narrative, your schedule of completion, your budget form, your justification, your list of key project staff, and each person's resume that's on that list. Again, if any of these are missing, your application could be rejected. Some of our programs require different documents than others. In some programs, the strategic plan summary is required, a proof of nonprofit status, depending on the type of eligibility that you're applying under. If you have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, we'll need to see that. If you're doing any work with digital products, you'll need to submit that form. Detailed condition reports if you have a collections project you're submitting. And then supporting documents are optional, but they are often very helpful to the reviewers to better understand what your project is about. So you'll want to make sure you have those documents in place. So a few tips in putting together your narrative. You want to make sure your project goals align with the grant program and the project categories. So sometimes we have really fantastic projects, but they just fell under the wrong grant program or project category. And unfortunately, the reviewers, they're answering questions based on how well your project is tying to the goals of that program and that category. So you could receive a lower score if your project is not in the right place. The project addresses a documented key need or challenge. So you don't want to do your project or think about your project in isolation. You want to talk to your community, you want to talk to your stakeholders, you want to make sure this is something that's really addressing a key need identified by your community or a challenge that is perhaps happening in your community. And you want to make sure it aligns with your strategic plan in the case of many of our programs. Your application reflects a thorough understanding of current practice and knowledge about the subject matter. So again, do your research. If other museums have done this type of work before, make sure you mention that and talk about what you've thought through as an institution. Your work plan consists of a set of activities tied directly to addressing the key need or challenge. Your budget elements connect to the project activities and are reasonable and supported. You don't want to throw in things under the budget that haven't been discussed in the narrative and vice versa. This is just a tip overall, is to make sure that your entire application package is cohesive. Oftentimes we notice that different people from different parts of the museum put application components together, and then they don't really make sense. The timeline is different in the schedule than it is in the budget, and it's different from the narrative. So you want to make sure all of those things go together. And you want to make sure you're going to generate measurable results that tie directly to that need or challenge. So whatever it is that you were hoping to achieve with your project, that you in some way can measure it. So as I mentioned before, consistency among application components. Crucial information is present and complete. Something I didn't mention before, but I can mention here is that, if you've mentioned something in your narrative, that's where your reviewers really should be finding the answers to all of their questions and what you plan to do. Don't bury it in your supporting documents. We often find that, sometimes folks put really relevant information in supporting documents and it's not anywhere in the application otherwise, and it's lost and it's missed by some of the reviewers. You want to make sure you don't have any copy and paste issues, that you've checked your spelling and grammar. It shouldn't be something that impacts the score of your application, but if reviewers are just, really can't follow your application because of something that basic, it can be detrimental to your application. So make sure you have someone else read it, look over all of your documents. Math, do some basic counts of everything, time estimates, budget calculations. We've had a number of times where we say, oh, we're going to digitize, X, Y, or Z in this amount of time. And the reviewers find it aggressive. It's too much. You haven't shown that you've done your research on how long it really takes to get a particular activity accomplished. And that can be a problem too, because we want to make sure that we're giving a federal grant, that we're not going to be extending the timeline beyond what you said you were going to do. So make sure you can give your best estimate and that you've crunched all the numbers. Ask a colleague to review your proposal with fresh eyes. And I even tell people, not even just a colleague, but someone outside of your museum or even outside of your profession, because sometimes we use jargon, we talk about things in a way that is not really clear to someone who maybe works at a different type of museum. So though your application will be reviewed by folks in the museum field, at that field review stage, it may be by folks who are very familiar with the type of work you're doing. But by the time it gets to panel, we've put together a group of folks who represent zoos and children's museums and science centers. And if you're at a zoo and you're talking a lot about care of animals that someone from a science center or children's museum doesn't understand, then that's not going to be very helpful to them. So make sure you make it super clear to anyone. Be early. Start checking your registrations now. Make sure your registrations for SAM.gov and DUNS and grants.gov are up to date. Every single year we have applicants that very sadly do not get their application through to us because they waited until the very end. Their application was put together and then they started to submit it, and unfortunately it did not go through because of some issues with registrations not going through. That can take weeks. So make sure you start early. So call or email a program officer assigned to different programs. It's all on our website. You can find all of our confirmation there, phone numbers, email addresses. We're very friendly crew, small but mighty. There are only about 9 of us right now. So we're there to help you. We want to help you have a successful application. So don't be intimidated. Please pick up the phone or send us an email. We're happy to talk to you about your project ideas. And lastly, I want to give you some links. So these are some online resources that you would find helpful. You can find all of the notice of funding opportunities on our website. You're not going to find the current ones for this year yet because those will not go live until later this summer, but you can look at last year's notices of funding opportunity for really helpful information. Many things don't change dramatically, so it's at least enough to get you started. You can find webinar schedules and recordings. So if you wanted to watch the webinar for last year's Museums for America program, you could watch that now. Again, it's not going to change dramatically. So if you wanted to get started, you could go ahead and take a look at that. You can find some sample applications on our website. So we do post a project description, at least, of every single grant that we've ever funded on our website, but we also post full narratives and abstracts of applications that were very successful in the previous year. So you can take a look at that too. If you want some help with logic models or understanding logic models, you can find a link to shaping outcomes on our website too. It's something we supported some time ago, but many people find that very helpful, and reviewers still find logic models very helpful. Museum reviewer resources. If you're a reviewer or you're curious about what it's like to be a reviewer, you can find all of that information on our website. And again, you can do search awarded grants to find all project descriptions from any previously funded grants. And then a series of publications that we've put together over the years, you can also find on our website. And that is all I'm going to say this afternoon. I'm hoping that we still have plenty of time for questions. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you now.
All right, so if you want to just go ahead and put your questions in the chat, we can all happily answer them. Lynn Island says, program officers are incredibly helpful. Do not hesitate to contact them regardless of your questions. There are no stupid questions.
That's true. Thank you, Lynn. We get emails and phone calls throughout the year. I just responded to 3 this morning for our deadline this fall. So people are already getting started.
From Mary Yeager, comment, her organization, Humanities Nebraska, offers grants, and I would like your goals and objective, she really likes your goal and objective approach to category descriptions.
That's great feedback, actually, because this is our first year doing this, and it's actually being mandated from on high, as we say, from the Office of Personnel Management and Budget. It's something that it's the way we sort of have to present things this year, and we were very worried that it was going to confuse our applicants because we're so used to presenting our information by categories and I've just for years been so used to saying, oh, you want to align your project with this category, or this is the category you should be in. And that's still true. It's just that the language has changed slightly. We need to start talking about goals and objectives as opposed to categories. So it's just going to be a little bit of a switch in the way we sort of present it. But I'm glad to hear that you think it's good. I'm still getting used to it.
Audrey asks, where do museums in Nebraska fall in successful grant applications?
Do you mean like I don't know that I would have the data right in front of me, but it's something I'm sure I could certainly pull. You can actually, when I was putting my slides together for this session, I did go to our website and I went to that search awarded grants page that I mentioned on the previous slide, and I clicked Office of Museum Services and I clicked Nebraska. And so I was able to find all of the ones that had been awarded, but to compare to how many are awarded versus how many are submitted would require more work than that.
Okay. And Lynn asks, how has COVID relief affected the IMLS budget or opportunities?
Well, it's been a lot. We did receive CARES Act funding last summer. I guess it was late spring. We were processing it all last summer. It's definitely made an impact, I would say. The bulk of the money we received, just because of the way IMLS is structured, went to grants to states, which is to our library office. But that's just the way IMLS is structured. Majority of our budget goes to grants to state libraries in general. So we had a pretty hefty amount that still went to the museum field as well. But the way Congress worded it, it wasn't sort of general operating support. I think what a lot of museums wanted and were seeking was help with staff and things like that. And so a lot of the language that we had difficulty working through was with the wording was that, it was about doing work digitally, I guess. So for museums and libraries to sort of pivot to that digital platform. And that's what the bulk of the funding was there to support. But a lot of museums were still able to sort of make that work, and we were able to support a good number of them. And again, you can find that on our website as well. And I don't know the details yet for the next round of COVID relief funding that we got and how it's going to be used. I'm sort of staying tuned on that, but we did receive money again, and we are poised to start, going through another grant program or however we're going to get that money out.
We have a question from Aaron Hauser. As an organization, could NMA apply for a grant to help our museums in Nebraska, assuming we had a project that qualified?
Yeah, so that's where you're going to want to look at the National Leadership Grant Program. So, associations and groups like that are helping multiple museums under their umbrella really are only eligible through the National Leadership Grant Program. And when I say national, it's interesting because, some projects are helping, like that example I show with rhinos at the Omaha Zoo. Sometimes they're helping, zoos across the entire country, or they're helping children's museums across the entire country. But sometimes they're just helping museums within their state and things like that too. So that's probably where you would want to look. And I could put you in touch with a program officer who runs that program to get better ideas about how you could support your entire state, but you couldn't apply just from eligibility to the other programs because a standalone museum has to apply for Museums for America, for instance, or Inspire. That doesn't mean they can't partner with other museums. Another approach would be to take one museum as the lead applicant and to partner with other museums within its state. We've also seen that too.
Are there any other questions? Well, I really appreciate all the information you shared with us today. I know I was taking notes.
Absolutely. I tried to make it a little more brief so we'd have time for questions. So this was a very quick run through of all of our programs, but I'm happy to answer any questions if people think of them after the fact too, or I can hold, through my full time here. If anyone, comes up with another question, it's up to you.
Yes, we've got lots of, Kelly says, great session. Sydney says, thank you. Lynn says, thanks, Reagan. Reagan, we really, for meeting with us remotely. Hopefully you can come to Nebraska someday.
Oh, love it. I've never been to Nebraska.
And Bonnie says, thank you. It's very informative.
Good. Well, I hope you are sharing my slides. I can send that to you separately if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Okay.
I can put them as a PDF on the website. The current website, which has the schedule on it, will then transform over the next few days to kind of a resources website from the conference.
Okay. Yes, I am happy to share my slides and my contact information and things like that if anyone wants to get in touch and ask me questions later. Sometimes if there's a specific project idea or something, it's better to talk offline anyway.
Great. All right. Well, Mary Yeager says she shared your information with the Great Plains Black History Museum in case they were not aware. So that's great.
Wonderful.
Yeah, they're a great organization in Omaha.
I feel like we've awarded them. When I was on the website yesterday searching awarded grants to try to get some other, ideas and places to share with you all, I'm pretty sure I came across that one.
Could be they are pretty active.
Yeah, I think we gave them a grant.
Great.
All right. Please do share the information about the Inspire program too. It's relatively new. We are supporting small museums there. And so that's been a very, very successful program, more so than I think anticipated. So do share the news about that because we've heard anecdotally for years that it's really difficult for small museums, to feel competitive with federal grant opportunities. So this is our way to, try to make that a little more palatable. It's a little less intense of a process. The funding amount isn't as great. The cost share is not required. I failed to mention earlier, but the narrative length is not even as long. It's only a 5-page narrative. National Leadership Grant, for instance, is a 10-page narrative. So we've tried to make it a little bit easier.
Thank you. Okay, so we are gonna roll straight into our annual meeting and election in just a moment. So thank you, Reagan. It was really informative.